This really involves more Jeff. I think he's very critical. So who is Jeff? Jeff is from Worldclass Bullshitters. I'm just going to say Worldclass from here on in because, YouTube policies, and I don't want to get tagged due to profanity. In any case, Jeff is Fandom Menace. He identifies as Fandom Menace, and Worldclass identifies as Fandom Menace. They're basically this multiracial group of guys who do their takes on Hollywood film. Jeff knows a lot about comics. He's a big Spider-Man fan. He's also part of the fandom in other places. In any case, he was right next to Jessi when all these things happened in Las Vegas. So let me just set up the structural thing, and then I'm going to let them speak, and they'll confirm various things. Essentially, Jessi and him, right, Jeff and Jessi, did show up on this Thursday event sponsored by Geeks and Gamers and Nerdrotic. And they're saying it was all good. It was all very friendly. They took photos. It was a public event. It was tied to this Star Trek celebration going on in Las Vegas. And they've been at that place, that exact place, this exact bar, the Millennium Bar, before. So, at least on Thursday, it seemed everything was fine. There were no issues. It's when Saturday, that's when all these things happen. So that's critical because these are the same people. It's the same place. And as Jeff says, the people know him there. They're friendly with him. And that's when these things happened. And it's sort of like, well, wait a minute. If there was a problem, why wasn't it raised Thursday? It's not. These are not different people. It's not even a different situation. It's the same place. And it was open to the public because, again, it was for fans, right? So they weren't told ahead of time they shouldn't come. But let me just add one little additional detail, which I think is a little confusing. This woman came over to Jessi to tell her to leave. Jessi did not know that was Gary's wife. So Nerdrotic's wife is Asian. She's, I think, a little bit small, petite. Jessi doesn't know who she is. So to her, it's just a strange woman. But apparently Gary was aggravated, and he thought they were escalating things because he already told his wife to tell them to leave. They didn't know it was his wife. So there's just a lot of misunderstandings occurring. So now we're going to let them speak, and they're going to confirm what happened during Saturday at Las Vegas.
To tell you, I believe it was you both, that it was incredibly rude of you showing up here on Thursday night like that this is an event for his fans and you're not welcome. And I said, well, many of these fans are also our fans, we're part of this community. And she said, I don't care. You need to get the fuck out. Okay. At which point now she raised her voice for that point. I don't know who or what saw, it's loud in there. No one was screaming or shouting to the level that the police were going to get, well, actually, yeah, Gary.
Because what happens next, though, is I'm in the middle of signing something, talking to a couple YouTubers, and then Gary comes over.
To both of us.
Yeah, gets all up in Jessi's face. I turn to Gary and look at him, and he starts yelling.
To the point where I felt, physically threatened. I felt like he was purposely trying to phically intimidate me.
He was, because he kept touching me, too.
Yeah, that pissed me the fuck off. Oh, God. He claps Jeff on the arm. I point him and said, don't you touch him. And he said, and Jeff said, Jeff reiterated, and he's like, what? I'll do what and he does it again, pats him down a couple of times. I'm like, bro, that's assault in, a lot of places.
I'm not, a little guy like that's not going to bother me. But
seriously.
Either way.
But I mean, that's it. What are you going to do? That's all you can do, little man.
And that's really the end of it.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of yelling.
Who yelled? So when they said, get the fuck out, what did you guys do?
So I turned back over. I went over to Jeff and I said, because I didn't know that was Gary's wife at this point. I didn't recognize her. I don't really follow their content. So
that happened.
So I came back over and I went to Jeff and I was like, some woman just told me that Gary said to get the fuck out. And Jeff and I were just like, what? What?
Yeah.
And we didn't really even, it wasn't even we didn't have time to do anything about it because another fan came up and asked, I think the same would ask you to sign something, asked me to sign the same thing.
Yeah, it was that guy who had a picture from the comic.
Yeah. And, it was so cool. He had printed out, he had gotten one of my fencing photos. I had done a photo shoot of, it was a really awesome photo shoot, me and my fencing gear out in nature and stuff. And he had an awesome printout of it that he wanted me to sign. And yeah, I was literally was handing him his pen back, and Gary's coming over to us. I'm like, oh, hey, Gary. And just, I mean, if you want to play the rest of it, but it's basically, yeah. He just came right in my face. I think the first thing he said was, did my wife tell you to get the fuck out? And I probably said, that was your wife or something and he said, then you need to get the fuck out. And I said, why? And he said, because you're a shit stirrer. And I said, what did I do? You know, we were here on Thursday. Everything.
Yeah,
I don't know what
the problem.
I don't honestly don't at this point. I don't know exactly verbatim what I said.
Well, the problem I have with all of this is they both spoke on Thursday.
Yeah.
Everybody came up to us on Thursday.
Yeah.
There's photos of all this shit.
Jeremy came right up to me and gave me a hug.
The fakeness that went on between Thursday and Saturday is the disappointing part, because either if you had a problem, say it, because I announced it weeks ago. I'm going. Exactly. I got just as big a platform.
Exactly.
People knew. Oh, the fans.
Okay, so we do have an independent person, and as Jeff says, there were other people there too. There are a lot of YouTubers, presumably people, not just Fandom Menace people, but people who are well known within, quote, the community, and they saw what happened. So they're just not naming names, but apparently all these things did happen, as they say, that Gary just got aggravated. He got in their face. He took it as a big, huge disrespect. He even showed up on Thursday. However, on Thursday, this was public. They have photos. It seemed very friendly, and so on and so forth. So apparently they were welcome on Thursday, but that was all an act. And apparently they didn't get the message that he was just being nice to them, but really he didn't want them there. Now, as to what is behind all this, a lot of people have told me this is really the Tom situation, in the fact that Jessi is friendly with Mecha Random, and Mecha Random has issue with Tom from Midnight's Edge, and that's the root of all this. But she does finally clarify from, again, Gary's mouth. We have to wait for him to confirm this or tell his side of the story. She's being labeled a troublemaker, and that's why she had to leave. And apparently Jeff also got this because he didn't find him too nice either. So Jeff was also being told to leave. Though why? I guess because Jessi and her are cool with one another, and that's enough for Gary to say, no, I don't want you here either. Because as Jessi says, both of them were being told to leave. It's not just, oh, you're Jessi, we've had a history with you at bars or whatever. I respect that interpretation that, you know, she has a history of causing trouble. Jeff was also being told to leave. But what did Jeff do? It's unclear. So apparently, the best we can figure out may be the Tom situation. Maybe that's in the background and Gary's just sticking up for a friend. Or this is me speculating. Apparently, Gary thinks he controls or runs enough the Fandom Menace, and him being one of the biggest channels, and he may be the biggest channel, he just feels like he can just dictate to people, okay, you're fine, you're fine, you're fine, you stay. You're not fine, you go, you leave now. But apparently the way the bar is structured, some people are saying that all that happened was this space was reserved and people were told to leave and Jessi just refused to leave. The way they're telling it, no, they just came through the door through this kind of gallery hallway. They were not even within the main bar and they were already being told to leave. And there's just a lot of people there, so there was some confusion. Jeff is confirming that, yeah, Gary became very aggressive. He became physical. He was touching him, and they both made very clear they didn't like that, and they were just being told to leave. But Gary did not specify. He's just like, my wife told you to leave. I was being nice. I told my wife to tell you to leave. You ignored her. Well, now I'm telling you personally, get the hell out of here. And as I say, they didn't even know it was his wife. So apparently, this is just a really bizarre thing at many levels, because Gary just assumes people should know who he is, know who his wife is, and apparently they're royalty. They're the king and queen. They decide things now, and you just obey. You don't ask questions. You just follow orders. So it looks really all kinds of terrible, because Gary does have this persona. He's nice and friendly when he does his videos. Says, hey, if you like what I do, just, I'm glad you stayed so far. Hey, thanks for listening. It's apparently just very phony persona, and he, behind closed doors is very dictatorial. I mean, this just honestly sounds like a mafia organization, or the way he construes it, that he runs the show, he tells people what to do, he decides who stays and who leaves. We're going to have to wait for more clarification from Gary, because at this point, it just looks terrible. Even if you're not, quote, friendly with the Fandom Menace, I can't think of a comparable case on the other side where people just are literally telling other fans within a bar. So yeah, it does look all kinds of terrible for Gary. But apparently he did do these things. He got physical and he got very aggressive and he was a lot of yelling. So we're going to have to just wait for more clarification. But it's not just Jessi. Jeff was there. Jeff confirms. Jeff corroborates what she says. And there were other people there too, a lot of prominent YouTubers, but they're just not naming names. So apparently these events did happen. Just a lot of people are staying silent. But why? Don't know. I don't know who these people are. Not Fandom Menace. I usually don't hang out with other YouTubers, so kind of like I'm in the dark as well. There we are. Thanks for listening.